जब मैंने 2 शादियां इकट्ठी करी और उसके मेरे को शेयर्स बहुत
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om. Good morning.
Hari Om.
Let's start. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Vidvishavahai. Om Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, action, actor, knowledge, happiness, everything. The idea of this section we have just covered or are concluding right now is to give you a definition of sattva, rajas, tamas. Otherwise, it's very difficult, it's very vague. Who's a sattvic person? You throw around this word sattvic, but what does it actually mean? How do you actually measure sattva? So, if I were you, I would plot a chart. I would make a chart with 3 columns, sattva, rajas, tamas, and 7 or 8 rows. And each row would be each of the things we have discussed. Each of the rows would be knowledge, action, actor, intellect, steadfastness, happiness, and now we'll conclude with renunciation. You should be able to, you should have it at the back of your head. You should have it at the back of. See, a lot of times you all will share WhatsApp forwards. Chanting competition. Wow, these kids are chanting so well. Look, in America, these kids are chanting any verse of the Bhagavad Gita. So we appreciate it, right? We appreciate when there's effort made to memorize, there's effort made to be, chant with that bhakti bhavana to assimilate the culture. I want you to make a little more effort, not only to chant, but if I were to ask you, according to the Bhagavad Gita, what is sattvic action? Not much. You don't have to memorize the whole Bhagavad Gita. Well, you can if you'd like, but the bare minimum. And this is one portion, as I said before, it comes the first 40 odd verses of chapter 18. Very useful. And as you've seen from our discussion, it's very pertinent. It helps in classification. It helps almost positioning us. See, when we discuss sattvic, rajasic, tamasic happiness, we know where we fall. We automatically get an idea, okay, sometimes I'm tamasic in my happiness. I want to forget the world and just mute myself, isn't it? Mostly I'm rajasic in my happiness. Rarely I'm sattvic, but there is sometimes I'm sattvic in my but you'll only be able to classify yourself when you know the definition, right? So we all appreciate bhakti bhavana, and which is very good. But beyond just chanting and memorizing, these few things, that's the then someone will appreciate, yes, this person has studied the Bhagavad Gita, or this person has studied Vedanta. These are the essential portions. So, continuing with our discussion, are there any questions pertaining to what all we have covered in the last couple of classes? Last class we covered Satvik, Rajasik, Tamasik, Buddhi, Dhriti, Sukham. We had started with the discussion of Buddhi and we discussed Dhriti and Sukham. Any questions?
I have a question which is not exactly around this, but I want to relate it to this. Is not standing up for yourself tamasic, or is it like, a show off when you show, like when you just show maturity or you don't react? Is that a sattvic thing? Like, what is the distinction between being silent in a certain situation or being like, okay, I'm not responding to this because I'm uh, I'm not standing up for myself?
See, other very interesting concept which maybe we have touched upon, I'm not sure. And that concept is sattva, tamas mimics sattva. Hmm? Tamas mimics sattva, which means superficially on the outside, if you're not critical about, getting into the depth of assessment, you might misunderstand tamas to be sattva.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Example, for example, I am undisturbed by the world. Superficially, we may conclude it's sattva, but it could actually be gross indifference. It could be heedlessness. I don't care.
Hmm.
On one hand, you may it may actually be tamasic. You may misunderstand it as sattva. Oh, this person is not affected. So on the superficial, if unless you apply your buddhi, unless you try to assess the actual trait, you might misunderstand tamas to be sattva. Same thing with what you have asked. Sometimes being silent may be understood as sattva. It might actually be tamas, but it totally depends on the circumstance. Now, there's no one size fits all answer, right? Um, I mean, look at the entire Mahabharata, for example. Hmm? At certain times, silence and negotiation was pursued. Right? After a point, war was the only option. We do the exact opposite. When we should negotiate, we make a hue and cry and argue and throw a fit. When we actually have to take an action, we sheepishly withdraw. Huh? It always happens, no? Whenever there's a family problem or something, we get together and complain and we do this and we that and we threaten. When the time comes to actually take an action, actually file a case, no, 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 no. Actually gadbad ho jayega. Huh? We do the exact opposite. When we should act, when we should we can negotiate and reach a concession, we show
Go to
us.
war.
But when it comes time to take action, there's no one answer. But in principle, I mean, define this term, standing up for yourself. It's become a very popular term now in this self-help world,
Yeah.
but what does it mean to stand up for yourself? Because see, standing up for yourself goes hand in hand with sacrifice. See, on the one hand, we talk about being true to yourself and standing up for yourself and being straightforward and being upright as spiritual values. Simultaneously, we talk about the spirit of service and sacrifice. Right? People misunderstand both. On the one hand, standing up for yourself, a selfish person will misunderstand standing up for yourself to be manmani, अपनी मनमानी करना. So maybe contextually, if you want to shed more light on the question, what do you mean by standing up?
So, sometimes like it could be that, elders or people who you can't really say much to, or I don't know about can't, but shouldn't. Uh, so should you like, say something in response to something wrong they are saying, or, when you don't think it's not necessarily that they've said something wrong towards you. It could be just in general a certain thing or a behavior or a certain, um, you know, when they've said something about someone else maybe, and then you just say, okay, no, this is not right, or instead you just be silent and be like, okay, let them do what they're saying.
See, different people have different ways of expressing. Some people may be more blunt and rash in their expression. Some people may be more soft and kind in their expression. But what matters here is intent, right? So, regardless of whether someone is young or old, see the idea of, or as adults, the best thing you can do for your child, best thing you can do as a teacher for your student, is to cultivate in them the ability to think for themselves. Okay, means to assess, understand, interpret values, right, and come to their own understanding and conclusion about them. We live in a society, we live by certain values, we have certain principles, we have certain practices. While society helps in maintaining a continuity, you know, it is you and it's our responsibility as individuals to assess and understand the deeper imports of all these values which we tend to follow. So tomorrow, regardless of a person's age, if what they are saying is wrong, right? First of all, is what they are saying wrong? Don't come to a conclusion. I'm not saying don't protest against someone, but be sure about what you are protesting. Right.
See, objectively it is.
So step back and question, and try to, if you have your own buddhi, if you want to consult someone else, if something is, amiss and you want to consult someone who may be able to, provide you perspective, do all of that and come to an objective conclusion. Okay, someone is saying something which is against dharma, against the values which culturally we are taught to pursue. There's no harm in flagging it off. There's no harm in raising, I mean, in fact, you ought to raise your voice against it, right? Question is how you choose to do it. Some people do it in a more rash manner, some people do it in a more rebellious manner, some people do it but in so much as you do this, you should also remember that we ought to follow a spirit of ahimsa. We ought to have a spirit of empathy. You know, everybody's had their, come to whatever beliefs and conclusions they have based on their experiences and their limitations, right? So nobody's a demon, right? Everybody has been a victim of their circumstance and experience. So have that level of empathy when you are dealing with such a conflict. That's about it. But absolutely, you ought to, you know, stand up to it. Certainly.
It depends on the importance of the thing also. Like you said, is it going against your values or is it going against dharma? I mean, where to react and where not to
Absolutely.
respond. Yeah.
And you are not here to also understand, you're not here to set right the world. Um, there will be good, there will be bad. People will have all sorts of shortcomings, people will have all sorts of virtues. Right. So the idea is here is not to be, you know, you don't have to butt your nose into every situation. Otherwise, all you'll find is problems and problems and problems.
Yeah, no, only when it's directly related to you or in front of you. Or something.
Absolutely. So, there's a fight in your neighbor's house and you go and try to resolve it and give a gyan to your no need. See, parallel, we have taught all these concepts in isolation. When you apply them, you have to apply them all together. There's another concept: knowledge is taken, not given. So you give your opinion only when it's asked for. Otherwise, people will not be receptive to it. So, so combining all of these, we have to choose how to act, what sort of action to take up. But in principle, the core problem being, should I stand up for something I see as being wrong? Absolutely, absolutely. There's no question about it. Upholding dharma is.
I wanted to ask about I wanted to ask you to explain you a little more on the steadfastness dhriti. Like it's saying restraining the activities of the body, mind, and intellect. And then it says cling on to duties and responsibilities you have imposed upon yourself. We get our duties, we understand with our intellect only that what are our duties and responsibilities. We don't impose it upon ourselves. It comes to us. You have to understand as you grow, you understand your responsibility, your duties. So we don't. How do we impose it on us and then doing our duties? And what is the difference between clinging on to the duties?
You have chosen the roles you are playing in life, and you are choosing to what extent and in what form you want to play them. So in that sense, the duties have been, you have imposed them upon yourself. The world is not telling you really, do XYZ things. It is you who have chosen these roles and responsibilities, and there's no one right way or one. See, we mimic others and then assume responsibilities, right? Rather than thinking about what our own capacity is. Just because a father is spending 4 hours with his child, I'm giving an example. Hmm. Suppose a father is spending 4 hours with his child, and you are extremely busy with your work, and you're not able to spend those 4 hours with your child on a daily basis. Right? Are you failing in your duty? But we tend to look at others and see what they are doing, and put that as being our responsibility as well. अच्छा वो तो उनके लिए इतना करते हैं, मुझे भी अपने अपनों के लिए इतना करना चाहिए, right? So that whole concept of duty and responsibility, it goes back to what I said earlier. We look for social direction, right? And assume what should be duty, what should be responsibility, where rather it should flow from inward, right? What is my capacity and what is my role? Because everybody has a different capacity, everybody has a different circumstance. There's no one right way, right? But when we get into this extroverted idea of duty and responsibility, we get into a fever of doing, and we are constantly worried about how others will perceive it or the world will perceive it. That's the fever of doing that he talks about, that kartritva bhavana, right? So when you have to understand what are your obligations, what are your duties, it should be an inward it should be a flow from inward. Means, who are you choosing to be, what roles have you taken up, and what is your capacity to perform these roles, what adjustments you may need to make in your life to better perform these roles. It has nothing to do with how others are performing the roles. Yes, you may learn and be inspired from others to make adjustments to your life, no doubt about that. You must be receptive to how others are doing things maybe better than you, no doubt. But merely mimicking them, or it's not the right approach. So what is your circumstance, what is your capacity, right? And driving that change from within incrementally is how you ought to approach your duties and obligations, right? Otherwise you get into a hurry and worry. Going back to the other question you asked was about sattvic dhriti. You asked, he says, the firmness in restraining the activities of the body, mind, and intellect to steer clear of worldly entanglement and channelizing all efforts to attain spiritual enlightenment. Now, what is sattvic dhriti? Sattvic dhriti is the dhriti, the steadfastness, the consistency with which you maintain the spiritual path. Now, the spiritual path is a constant awareness and pursuit of God. Period. This is the highest rung of the ladder. Idea is your approach to be spiritually evolving step by step. That consistency is called sattvic dhriti. Now, what is the impediment in the spiritual journey, the impairment in the spiritual journey is constant entanglement in the world. Attachment, involvement, entanglement, obsession. You get into that whole whirlwind of desire and attachment, which we've talked about multiple times. What do you need to do? You can't. Escaping the world is not an option, right? You have to be in the world and manage it. You have to steer yourself away from this entanglement while fulfilling your duties and responsibilities in the world, while playing your role in the world. So, what is the role? What do you have to do? You have to implement, you have to utilize your buddhi to guide, direct, and manage the mind. We've discussed this time and again. So, that firmness of the buddhi, that firmness of the buddhi to in and through all the activities, whether it's your physical activities, your emotional activities, your intellectual activities, not to slip into attachment and entanglement, but maintain objectivity through all the roles you play in life, through all the responsibilities you take up in life. Whether you're a business person, whether you're a father, mother, whether you're a friend, whether you're a um, employee, whatever you are, whatever role you are playing, doing it to the best of your ability, maintaining objectivity, upholding and recalling and implementing these values, that dhriti, that consistency, it's a full-time awareness. It's a full-time awareness. Your buddhi is always on. That dhriti is sattvic. So it's a totally different kind of consistency, right? It's totally different kind of uh, focus. Does that answer your question? So the firmness, if I may add to the sentence,
Yes,
the
yes.
firmness of the intellect, the firmness of the intellect in restraining the activities of the body, mind, intellect, to steer clear of entanglement, involvement, attachment, so that your energies, your efforts are channelized towards the spiritual journey. You only have that much time, you only have that much energy in a day. If you spend it in useless thoughts, if you spend it in useless engagements, if you spend it in your attachments and involvements, it burns you out. So, where are you channeling your efforts? How are you? Do you have that self awareness to reject a thought that is not helpful and promote a thought that is helpful? That consistency. This is not taking me closer to my spiritual goal. This thought is helpful. Let me promote it.
Even
That is Dhriti. If you're able to do it 100%, you have 100% sattvic dhriti. If you're able to do 10%, 20%, you have 20% sattvic dhriti. Start incrementally, right? That's the idea. Yeah.
to add to this in a simple way, like to maintain this drittiness, like steadfastness. Suppose like when you get up in the morning, your tendency is to pick up your phone, or when you're trying to brush your teeth, the tendency is to let the tap, the water flow. So even these small things, like you should not pick up the phone immediately, or you should not. So these are also. This was also like when you analyze yourself, the first thing, the small steps to do is like, switch off the tap, or don't take the phone up. This is all steadfastness. If you
Absolutely. See, your sattvic dhriti, if you, I mean, to summarize what I said, is a self-awareness, right? In essence, what we, if you have to summarize in a few words, what is sattvic dhriti? It is a constant self-awareness, and that constant self-awareness will be reflected in all the smaller actions of life as well. Huh? Are you conscious of dirt around you? Are you conscious of wastefulness around you? Are you conscious of people around you? Are you able to read the room? Hmm? So from the smallest to smallest activities to the subtlest of activities, it's self-awareness. So constancy and self-awareness is sattvic dhriti. Absolutely. Okay. Further questions?
Yeah. I wanted to know, I didn't find a difference between Rajas intellect and the Tamas intellect. I thought they were both the same.
It's
What's the difference? This, whatever the difference, I couldn't.
good question. Good question. See, in Rajas there is confusion. Okay, in Rajas there is confusion. There is certainly an attempt to understand. There is, it's a hit or miss. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong. Right. Um, in Tamas there is absolute certainty that wrong is right. So while both Rajas and Tamas, are a misunderstanding, the extent to which you're tamasic, you'll be convinced of your misunderstanding. What nonsense! I don't agree. This is what I believe in. This is what's right. So that non-receptivity is tamasic, and it's very difficult to make them receptive. Only knocks and shocks of life, only drastic events of life can even make them reconsider their opinions. A Rajasic person seeks the guidance of others, no doubt. Huh? But because of their own lack of knowledge and lack of clarity, there is a confusion. They come to wrong conclusions about what is right, what is not right, what they should do, what they should not do, what is helpful for them spiritually, what is not helpful for them spiritually. Because there is a lack of depth in their understanding. So, while their hearts might be in the right place, as they put it, right? His heart is in the right place. They perhaps they wish to know the right thing, but because of the lack of depth, there is confusion and a lack of sincere effort. There is confusion. If you So a rajasic intellect is like a weak muscle, right? It's like a weak muscle. You work on it, and chances are it will turn sattvic. You don't work on it, it will descend to tamas. So a weak intellect with a lot of ego is tamasic. A lot of arrogance is tamasic. Shrouded in ignorance, layers and layers of ignorance. No way to penetrate.
Thank you.
Utsav, this sattva and tamas really um, like sometimes the line is so fine that you can't understand whether someone is being sattvic or tamasic.
Tamas mimics sattva.
Yeah, like if you try to observe it in your day-to-day life or in people or in yourself also, like which is why my question was there as well regarding that, but it really does mimic sattva. And
Tamas mimics sattva. That's why
how do
people
you
misunderstand tamas to be sattva. People also misunderstand sattva to be tamas.
yeah.
How can you not feel bad in this situation? How can you not? Which is why sometimes, if you're sattvic, you have to pretend. You have to be affected. Otherwise, people will think this person has no heart. See, deep emotions are not visible on the face always. The deeper the emotion, the less the expression. But the world doesn't understand that. They misunderstand that depth of emotion to be indifference because it's not visible. So yes, tamas mimics sattva, and sattva is misunderstood as tamas. The whole world believes Vedanta turns you indifferent to the world. Take any average person, What is their idea of renunciation? Renunciation means giving up the world, not caring about the world. They are misunderstanding sattva as tamas. How to solve it? I don't know. Individually, you can solve it by building your buddhi. That's it. By getting to the depth, not judging a book by its cover, by trying to understand beyond just superficial expression and emotion, what is at the depth of their belief and value. That's one way to save yourself from this wrong interpretation. But by and large, the world doesn't go into the depths of things. And that's why they misunderstand, misinterpret it. But absolutely right. Tamas mimics sattva.
In a car, when you are driving, accelerator is a rajas and brake is a tamas. It's a mechanical form of that.
Sometimes brake is very important. Sometimes brake can be sattvic also. I
No,
think that,
the mixture of the two is the sattvic only, na? This is how you drive.
no. Don't get, see again, there's a misunderstanding that, oh, sattva is a mixture of rajas and tamas. No, sattva is an elimination of rajas and tamas.
Yeah, elimination, yeah.
You eliminate tamas, you eliminate rajas, what remains is sattva. There's some concept people have that, oh, combination of tamas and rajas is sattva. No, that's it. I mean, self-evident from what all we are discussing. Eliminate tamas, you get rajas. You eliminate rajas, you get sattva. What remains is sattva. So, in fact, that's, when you study the Bhagavad Gita also, he talks about that. He says, you can't be sattvic. You have to stop being tamasic, you have to stop being rajasic. You have to eliminate tamas, you have to eliminate rajas. What will remain is sattva. Sattva is an effect, sattva is a result. Which is why it's very important to understand the other two as well. Okay, last one. Sattvic renunciation, tyaga. In fact, chapter 18 begins with this question. What is tyaga? What is the difference between tyaga and sannyas? That's the first question of Arjuna in chapter 18. And although we are discussing tyaga at the very end of our personality chart discussion, we are discussing tyaga at the very end. But in the actual Bhagavad Gita, tyaga appears first in the very first portion of chapter 18. Okay, renunciation, tyaga.
Renunciation, tyaga. Sattvic renunciation is relinquishment of attachment and fruit while performing obligations in life. The practice of sattvic renunciation is functioning objectively in the world, merely fulfilling obligatory duties and responsibilities, with no preferential attachment to action performed and no expectation of enjoyment of fruit thereof. It is therefore not renunciation of action as such. Ironically, sattvic renunciation is defined as performance of action that ought to be done without appendages burdening it. Rajasic renunciation is giving up action that is painful out of fear of bodily strain or suffering. In such cases, one would take up the action when the element of pain or fear of suffering is removed. That is no renunciation. Consequently, it is deprived of the fruit of true renunciation. Tamasic renunciation is relinquishment of one's obligatory duties out of delusion. A human being has to perform two types of duties. One is his regular routine duties as the member of a family, society, nation, etc. The other is the occasional special duties. But in ignorance, he is confused as to his duty and responsibility and discards what ought to be done. That is tamasic renunciation.
So let's go backwards again. You tell an ordinary person, ask an ordinary person about renunciation. Ask yourself about renunciation before you started attending this class. What is renunciation? Renunciation is the giving up of one's involvement in the world, is the giving up of one's possessions and positions. That's the concept we hold. Renunciation is a giving up. And a very common criticism of this is one gives up their responsibilities, one gives up what they're supposed to do. So when the world knows or understands or relates to renunciation, their concept is generally about tamasic renunciation. What is tamasic renunciation? Tamasic renunciation is giving up one's obligations out of delusion, out of misunderstanding, out of ignorance. There are two types of duties you have in life, he says. Regular duties, nitya karma, and occasional duties, naimittika karma. Nitya karma is your daily responsibilities, responsibilities you have towards your body, responsibility you have towards your profession, responsibilities you have towards your immediate family, responsibility you have towards your immediate transactions, your immediate business in life. And occasional routine duties are things you have to take care of once in a while. Your extended obligations, maybe towards your office team members. Once in a quarter, you have to take them out for a meal. Towards your second or third cousins, once in a while, you have to attend some family functions. Occasional duties. Broadly, they all relate to the roles and responsibilities you are playing in life. Your obligations come out of that. When you give up these out of delusion, out of some funny understanding, it could be anything. That is tamasic renunciation. When you give it up out of a disinterest, out of heedlessness, I don't care attitude, that is tamasic renunciation. So when you give up what you're supposed to do, as a definition, when you give up what you're supposed to do, it's tamasic. And 99% of the times the world, when it talks about renunciation, it talks about this. This is not true renunciation. This is not the tyag that we talk about. This is not the tyag that the Gita asks you to inculcate. This is not the true spirit of tyaga. The other kind of renunciation is the rajasic renunciation. Rajasic renunciation, again, is a giving up of action. Just like tamasic renunciation is the giving up of certain actions, rajasic renunciation is also giving up of certain actions. There the cause is delusion, ignorance, heedlessness. Here the cause is fear, pain, worry, fear of failure, fear of the struggle. A lot of the times people are not taking up certain actions. Why? Because it will be very stressful to take up. It will be very difficult to do. Or it will be painful. So worry about the action or the consequence. Worry about the action or the pain it might cause you. That's when you don't do it. See, any action, remember, any action is prompted by a desire. Okay, go back to our concept of, remember the chronology of action? You guys remember the chronology of action? Chapter 5. Not very far back. What's the chronology of action? What precedes an action?
Desire.
Desire. Where does the desire come from?
The thought. It's the thought that creates
Thought.
it.
No thought. And where does that thought come from?
Vasna.
Vasna.
Vasanas are the seeds from which your thoughts sprout. Thoughts
Thought leads to desire.
desire, and desire is what prompts and pushes you to act. So in any action, there is a desire prompting the action. When it comes to rajasic renunciation, your desire for the action and for the result thereof is very much there. You still have the desire. I wish I can do this. I wish I would be able to do it. But you don't do it. Why? Because, oh, but actually it will be very painful. I want a lot of money, but I don't want to put in the effort for it. It'll be too much of a struggle. I'm happy with this much. You resign yourself to a compromise. I'm happy with this much. Not because you're truly happy, but because doing more will be a struggle, will be painful. So the desire is very much there. The urge for the result is very much there. If someone told you, listen, I'll help you, I'll reduce your effort by half, immediately you'll jump to it. Yes, I'm ready. If the strain, if the fear, if the element of suffering is removed, you'll readily take up that action. You'll jump to it. See, because most of us are rajasic in our action, we have to be given warnings or punishments. Suppose you're in school. Let's go back to school. Suppose you're in school. If you're at or college, if your attendance is not more than 80%, you will not be allowed to sit for the exam. You guys remember that rule in college? Was it around at your time? When I was in college, that was quite prevalent in India at least. If your attendance is not 80%, you will not be able to sit for the exam. Suppose I said, listen, I'm going to waive that. People attend the classes. People attend the classes because of that fear. You remove the fear, they'll continue doing what they are doing.
Can I ask you a question? Now that we're talking of tyag. So somebody the other day told me that once you get your son married and they have children, you should just seal your lips and have the attitude of, I don't know. Even if you see, because either his wife will not appreciate or the other spouse will not appreciate. So if you want happiness and bliss in life, you have to become ignorant and seal your lips, which I found as a very strange kind of advice, but just that's how the world is functioning these days. So when do you think is the right time to give off your obligatory duties from your children? Do you think as a parent you can ever get out of it? Or, I mean, do you think it's as grandparents when they give advice to their grandchildren, who might be heedless, and maybe the parents don't appreciate, but should you go ahead?
See, first as well, I'll answer this question in private.
Okay. Okay. Accepted.
No, I can very much answer it. Very serious questions. I thought of lightening the mood. See, whether it's your grandchildren or whether it's your children, the principle is the same. The principles are the same. The spirit of detachment, the idea that knowledge is given, not knowledge is taken. The willingness to allow the other person the freedom to choose, make mistakes, falter, all these things, right? When we become attached and obsessed, we impose rather than allow this sort of free flowing process. So whether it's your children or grandchildren, the spirit is the same. Um, you have to understand. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that you have to understand that your children are also becoming parents. So they also have to. They also have a learning curve. If you impose or overimpose what you believe is right, and it may be right, you're not allowing them the learning curve to learn how to be parents, right? Um, that's one thing. Second thing being, you have to be cognizant of the fact that the world is different from what it was when perhaps you were becoming a parent, right? So you have to have that humility that there is a generational change, there is a change in the way in which people function, there's a change in the way in which society functions. So your ideas or practices may need a certain modification, right? Third thing is, it's just blank right now. Oh God, that's such a good thought. Huh. See, there is a difference between dharma and mata. That knowledge is of two types: dharma and mata. Dharma is the eternal essential values. Mata is the adaptation of those values in various circumstances. Is an application and interpretation of those values in different stages or circumstances or situations, right? So the mata, when you were a parent or when you were growing up, is different from the mata that is there today, will be different from the mata that will be there 30 years later. The dharma is the same. So um, our thought should be in conveying dharma, not mata. That has to be intelligently done. All this said, remember the fundamental principle: knowledge is taken, not given. You may have a lot of advice to give your children, you may have a lot of help to provide your grandchildren, but it's for them to take it from you, it's not for you to give it. Okay. See, this doesn't mean you resign yourself. Okay. The statement "seal your lips" comes with a pinch of salt, right? There's an interpretation to it you have to make. It doesn't mean you resign yourself and you suppress yourself, right? And as I said, it's the same whether you're raising your children or your grandchildren. Always be available, but speak only when asked. Guide only when suggested. The beauty is when people falter or make mistakes, they'll automatically come to you for help. If you provide the help without them seeking it, they'll almost resist it, right? So that little bit of detachment you have to have. Let them wander, let them meander, let them figure out their own, who else will they come to for help? They'll come to you for help. If you try to impose your ideas and your thoughts and there'll be a resistance. Does that
Should I add one line?
is
When you give a thought, there used to be one slogan in the TV: Sabjan hitaye, Sabjan sukhaye. If it is in the hit of the person and he is happy also, तब तो बहुत ही अच्छी बात है कि तब तो खोलना ही चाहिए मुंह और बताना ही चाहिए. सब जन हिताए, सब जन सुखाए. ये स्लोगन हमेशा टीवी में आता था, दूरदर्शन में पहले. तो हेयर ऑल्सो इट कैन बी अप्लाइड कि बताना तो चाहिए ही बच्चों को, लेकिन उनके हित की बात भी हो और उनको वो खुश भी हो जाए सुन के, तो तब तो बहुत ही अच्छी बात है. ये मेरा आइडिया है.
Thank you so much.
what Mona ji is trying to say कि वो होता नहीं है, वो हित की बात हमको लगती है उनके हित की है, लेकिन उस समय उनको नहीं लगती वो उनके हित की है,
हाँ,
इसलिए
तो
वो हित और सुख
उनको सुखाती नहीं है ना, उनको सुख नहीं देती
हाँ
ना, ये बात है।
उनको सुख नहीं देती है.
तो
और
ये
Mona ji is asking, I can also understand. I am
Yeah, you know, your
still a young
grandchildren are
parent.
having chocolates and you tell them no, and the daughter-in-law says, Mom, we've grown up in chocolates. What are you stopping them from having chocolates? You know, so
this is a game more of psychology than
I think
philosophy.
we all have to learn it our way.
With your heart in the right place, the right philosophical attitude, it's more of a
और
game.
मुझे भी खूब अच्छा नुस्खा मिल गया है. मैं तो मुझे भी खूब अच्छी आइडिया मिल गई है कि तुम बोला ना ऑलवेज बी अवेलेबल, बट पूछने पर सलाह दो.
अब मैं क्या आइडिया दूं, मैं मतलब
मैं तो इसका बहुत मजा ले रही हूँ.
I'm giving grandparents my opinion.
नई नई बनी उन्ना पड़ दादी.
नहीं, एक चीज बहुत अच्छी बोली आपने कि जनरेशन गैप है. हम लोग जो हैं और आज जो नया जनरेशन है उनकी थिंकिंग बहुत अलग है. देयर एक्सपोजर इज मच मोर देन व्हाट वी हैड. तो हमको उनके लेवल के ऊपर भी थिंकिंग करके उनको समझाना चाहिए. बिकॉज हम अपने आइडिया, पुराने आइडिया को लेके वही घुसे पीटे आइडिया अभी जो चलते नहीं हैं उनको थोपने की कोशिश करते हैं, तो बच्चे नहीं समझ. तो हमको उनके लेवल के ऊपर आके ही उनको समझाना पड़ेगा. तो जैसे उनकी लैंग्वेज में उनको समझाना, तो वैसे ही बात है.
Correct. And Bhunaji, going back to your, I mean, maybe a silly example that you gave, but say for chocolates, right, or whatever. In general, do's and don'ts are not helpful. Again, whether it's your children or your grandchildren, and it's when we create these do's and don'ts that there are conflicts. So you have to find a more intelligent way of conveying. Of course, your heart is in the right place. You don't want the child to develop bad habits of, especially in a world where there's so much sugar available and everything. It's only creating a weakness for chocolates. But there are intelligent ways of incentivizing. There are intelligent ways of, going about it, of rewarding, making a chocolate like a reward. I still remember my wife tells me growing up, for her, eating a bag of chips was like a reward. So she was never punished for eating chips, rather. It was made to look like, okay, you do XYZ things, and on Sunday you will get a bag full of whatever you like, all your goodies. You like chocolates, you like chips, you like XYZ things. Hope.
The problem of today's world is that everything is available and kids have more than what they also want. That's also a very big problem, which was never there earlier generation. So now they have more than what they need. So there's no idea of incentivizing and gifting. वो concept ही नहीं रह गया है.
Absolutely, I mean, to some extent there is. I mean, they don't have the money to buy it. For example, right? There are controls and things you can put in place, no doubt, right?
This generation, excess is the cause of their unhappiness at times, I feel. But it's each to his own, I think it's right. It's a generational gap that we have to understand.
No, absolutely. And, whether it's a cause for unhappiness or an additional challenge in the world, no, but there's no escaping it, right? It has to be addressed. We can't take a doomsday attitude to this. It's the reality of the world. So intelligently adapting to it and finding psychological tools and tricks is, again, as I said, I'm not experienced in this yet, so I will not know. There's only that much I can convey. But
we have passed through an experience of deprivation. And now there's a life of abundance. There's a lot of difference now. हम लोगों को कुछ समझाने के लिए एक थप्पड़ पड़ता था, तो that was the only education we had. तो अभी तो now we cannot use that method, and we are trying to do the same thing because हम सोचते हैं कि वही ठीक है. वो ठीक नहीं है. अभी समय बहुत बदल गया है, तो हमें को समय के पेरेंटिंग इज नॉट सो इजी. हम लोग सोचते हैं कि बस पेरेंटिंग बड़ी स्टैंडर्ड है, बस जो बोल दिया तो ठीक है. नहीं, अभी बच्चे बहुत समझदार हो गए हैं. उनके जीन्स में भी चेंज आ गया है, बच्चों में बहुत जागृति आ गई है, इतना एक्सपोजर हो गया है। हम लोग अपना आइडिया नहीं थोप सकते उनको, हमको उनके तरीके से ही सोच के उनको समझाना पड़ेगा। कई दफा हमको उनको फ्रेंड्स की उनके जरिए से ही उनको समझाना पड़ता है। हमको अपने अपने आइडिया से अगर समझाने की कोशिश करें तो हमारे को ही दुख होगा बाद में कि भाई अरे ये तो मेरी बात सुनता ही नहीं है। तो यही दुख हमारे को खाया जाता है कि देखिए, इसलिए ग्रैंड चिल्ड्रन को हमेशा हम समझाने की कोशिश करते हैं, क्योंकि लड़के बच्चे सुनते नहीं है। तो बच्चे सुनते नहीं है, ग्रैंड चिल्ड्रन को समझाने की कोशिश करते हैं, वो भी सुनते नहीं है आजकल।
Okay,
Yeah,
back to
Utsaji, is there any role of karma theory for these family problems?
why only problems? Even for your family joys, there is karma
Yeah,
theory.
of course.
All your problems and all your joys are all your karma.
जितनी मर्जी गीता प्रैक्टिस कर लो, अगर बच्चों का
As
सुख नहीं मिलना तो नहीं मिलेगा, ऐसा भी होता है क्या?
Anji,
No, no, we are
जितनी
all
मर्जी गीता प्रैक्टिस कर लो घर में,
here to
अगर बच्चे का सुख नहीं मिलना तो नहीं मिलेगा। ऐसा हो सकता है?
देखिए,
ड्यू टू कर्मा।
सुख लेने के लिए अपने आप को साधना पड़ेगा। अब बच्चों से सुख कहाँ से आप एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं? पहले आप
those
अपने
who
आप को
truth and
साधिए।
wisdom lead, अभी हमने एक पोएम पढ़ी थी, those who truth and wisdom lead can gather honey from a weed.
Should watch this
Yeah.
movie 101 Not Out. Amitabh Bachchan.
Those who
Very
truth and
nice movie.
those who truth and wisdom lead can gather honey from a weed. आप उसका आप मतलब समझो।
Welcome. That's why there is no role of karma theory in this case.
Right. देखिए, if you want to complain, you can find a problem with anything. There's good and bad in anything. If you want to focus on the bad in someone and complain about it, your complaints will be endless, right? So nobody's been dealt with all bad cards, all good cards, right? But the fact remains, जितने आप इस साधना में आप आगे बढ़ोगे, then despite the worldly circumstances, you'll be able to maintain a level of joy, a level of contentment, a level of objectivity, of satisfaction. See, what you said, our experiment with our children already failed. Now we're trying the same experiment with our grandchildren. So this is not a problem created today. This is a problem created 25, 30 years ago. So, but the values remain the same. The principle remains the same. Knowledge is taken, not given.
उत्सव जी, अगर आप ये 3 क्रिकेट के मैच जो आपने टेस्ट मैच देखे हैं, सबसे पहले मैच में तो हम लोग हार गए थे, सेकंड मैच में कैसे भी संभल के हम जीत गए, थर्ड मैच कितना ब्यूटीफुली हमारे यंग लड़कों ने जिता दिया हमारे को। वो जायसवाल देखिए, वो बच्चा छोटा सा बच्चा है, उसने सबको चित कर दिया इंग्लैंड को। तो हमको रिस्पेक्ट करना चाहिए, जो बच्चे आजकल जो उनकी जो प्रतिभा है उसको भी वैल्यू देनी चाहिए। ये नहीं है कि भाई अब जो कैप्टन था वो उतने रन नहीं बना सका, हालांकि शर्मा इज सो गुड, बट ये यंग लड़का कितने रन बना लिए उसने। तो हमको हर आदमी की प्रतिभा देखनी चाहिए, उसको समझाने के लिए उसके हिसाब से ही चलना चाहिए, और उन्होंने मैच जिताया हमारे को। तो अल्टीमेटली
आपसे बड़ा कोई एग्जाम्पल नहीं है। आप अपने 1/3 एज के लड़के से गीता का क्लास पढ़ रहे हैं, आपसे बड़ा कोई एग्जाम्पल ही नहीं है जो ये चीज को फॉलो कर रहे हैं।
नहीं, 1/3 भी नहीं हुई जी, 1/3 भी नहीं,
ऐसा नहीं है।
आप 97 के हो ना?
गुरु तो गुरु ही होता है।
87 जी।
उनकी साधना है, उनकी साधना की वजह से हम लोग सीख रहे हैं। हमारी उतनी साधना नहीं है.
Okay, sattvic renunciation. Before we conclude, I want to conclude this chapter. Sattvic renunciation is the relinquishment of attachment and fruit while performing obligations in life. The practice of sattvic renunciation is functioning objectively in the world, merely fulfilling obligatory duties. So, the first and most important distinction between sattvic renunciation and the other two kinds of renunciation is in rajasic, in tamasic, you're giving up your obligations. You're giving up action. You're giving up duties. Sattvic renunciation, true renunciation, is not giving up anything. Sattvic renunciation is taking up your duties. So, performing your duties and responsibilities. And we've talked about duties, we've talked about obligations, where they come from. Performing those obligations to the best of your ability. What are you then renouncing? What are you giving up? You are giving up your attachment to the action, and you're giving up your expectation, your craving for the result. Period. No doubt, a desire is prompting the action. No doubt, a desire is prompting you to act, but you are not letting that thought of the result, you're not obsessing about the thought of that result. You're not letting it, you're attending to it by taking up the right kind of action. You have that understanding. If I do the right kind of action, it will lead to the right kind of result. Period. So, no thought or obsession of the result, no attachment to the action, no kartritva bhavana. So it's not giving up anything, it's taking up of obligation. Right? It's taking up of what you're supposed to do. The world may not think you're doing your obligation. The world might think your obligations are something else. We're not saying you're doing what the world expects you to do. Please. A lot of people doing the sattvic, actually sattvic renunciates, the world misinterprets as tamasic renunciates. Going back to our concept of sattva mimics, tamas mimics sattva. Person may think, people may think someone is giving up their responsibilities and obligations towards their family. It might be the case. You look at the life of Swami Ramatirtha, you'll say at the age of 30 he gave up his family life. Didn't he have obligations to his family? But he went into complete monkhood. So people will interpret tamasic, sattvic renunciation as tamasic. People will misunderstand tamasic renunciation as sattvic. That will always happen. To thine own self be true. To thine own self be true, and it must follow as night does day. You have to have a clear conscience and a clarity of what your obligations are. And for that you require a buddhi. And performing them to the T. Anashrita karma phalam karyam karma karoti yaha. Sa sannyasi cha yogi cha. Such a person is a tyagi, such a person is a sannyasi. Right? So prepare your chart. Prepare your chart. That will be the conclusion of our a thought with this chapter.
Prepare your chart. The above classifications of different facets of action and renunciation provides the material for assessing your personality. Take up each one of them. Study it carefully. Try to match it with your nature. Thus, comparing each one of them with your nature, you may draw your personality chart and estimate the quality of knowledge you possess, sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, the quality of action you execute, the type of actor you are, etc. All of them examined together present a clear picture of your personality. The area where sattva prevails, where rajas flourishes, and where tamas lingers. This should be of considerable help to locate the areas of your strength and weakness and administer corrective measures for the development of your personality. Human beings fall between 0 and 100% development. 0% would be like an inert object. 100% would be a self-realized soul. Hence, the entire range of people fall between the two extremities. It becomes rather difficult, if not impossible, to clearly define one's personality. The personality chart would therefore serve as a yardstick to measure your spiritual status and program your evolution. Section 2.
So, this personality chart will serve as a yardstick. Prepare it. First and foremost, create the chart. Create a tabular chart. I would recommend that. And study each of these traits carefully. Each of the sattvic, rajasic, tamasic traits carefully. And accordingly, you may have an objective assessment of yourself to give yourself a score perhaps, and an increase in that score as far as sattva is concerned is what would reflect as spiritual evolution, right? Earlier, the kind of action you may have been performing or the kind of happiness you may have been seeking may have been more rajasic in nature, may have been more tamasic in proportion. Improving that proportion of sattva in each of these areas is a growth spiritually. So it's an objective measurement of your spiritual growth. This is how you can track your spiritual growth. So it gives you a yardstick. It would be very helpful. So I would certainly recommend creating this chart. With that thought, we'll conclude today. I'll take up any further questions if there are very quickly. If not, we will meet you on Monday. So any quick questions?
मेरा ख्याल है हमारे हिंदुस्तान में स्वामी उसी को बोलते हैं जिसने अपने सारे ये इंद्रियों को कंट्रोल कर लिया, जो राजसिक पर्सन है। इसलिए स्वामी का मतलब ही यही है जो अपने सारी फैकल्टीज को कंट्रोल में रखता है और सात्विक होता है। तो इन ए वर्ड, सिंपल वर्ड, राजसिक पर्सन वही है। इस हम
सात्विक पर्सन वही है।
सात्विक, आई एम सॉरी, सात्विक।
Above 80% sattva and everything,
स्वामी। ये वर्ड हिंदुस्तानी वर्ड है, बाकी दूसरी किसी लैंग्वेज में वर्ड भी नहीं है ये। अपने ऊपर कंट्रोल होना, अपनी इंद्रियों के ऊपर, अपने फैकल्टीज के ऊपर कंट्रोल होना, उसको ही स्वामी बोलते हैं।
Indeed. Sanjaya. Yes, Chetna ji.
ये उत्सव जी, स्वामी राम तीर्थ ने 30 साल की एज में अपना फैमिली छोड़ दिया, ऐसा आपने शायद बोला अभी।
जी।
तो ये सात्विक रिनंसिएशन हुआ क्या?
अब आप स्वामी राम तीर्थ के जीवन के बारे में पढ़ो, थोड़ा समझो, and then we'll come to that conclusion. But what I'm saying is a third person looking at it and hearing about it for the first time, coming to a superficial conclusion about it, may think it is tamasic. आप पहली बार सुनोगे, आपको तो लगेगा he is giving up his responsibility to his family. But tamas mimics sattva. Sattva is misunderstood as tamas. That's a common misconception. आपको गहराई में जाना पड़ेगा। आपको उनकी सर्कमस्टांस, वो कौन है, उनका क्या रोल है, उनकी क्या वासनाएं हैं, वो समझनी पड़ेंगी, राइट? तो if you ask me, certainly it is a sattvic renunciation, right? But
आजकल भी बहुत से ऐसे केसेस होते हैं कि लोग अपना फैमिली छोड़ के जो है सन्यासी बनते हैं। तो मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस में
ऐसे होते हैं, ज्यादातर केसेस ऐसे होते हैं, और ज्यादातर केसेस में वो तमसिक रिनंसिएशन होता है। अगर
वो कुछ टाइम बाद वापस आ जाते हैं दुनिया में, अगर नहीं आते तो कैसे होगा?
ऑल हो ही नहीं सकती सर। आप इट्स नॉट अबाउट, हम यहाँ एक टेम्पलेट को लेकर के सब पर हम छाप नहीं सकते।
ओके,
ये एक्शन सात्विक है, ये एक्शन तमसिक है। हम it's not a particular action that we can conclude, or doing it in this way sattvic, doing it in this way. What is the intention? What is the circumstance? You have to understand all of that, right? So जब आप अपने कार्यम कर्म को करने में जुट जाओ, वही सात्विक रिनंसिएशन है। अब आपका कार्यम कर्म क्या है वो आप ही जानते हो। वो कोई चाचा ताऊ, कोई एरा गहरा नथु खेरा नहीं जानता। हम यहाँ पे स्वामी राम तीर्थ के कार्यम कर्म को समझने और कंक्लूड करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। वी आर नॉट द वंस टू डिसाइड व्हाट इज दिस कार्यम कर्म। आप सिर्फ अपने कार्यम कर्म को जान सकते हो, समझ सकते हो। The point I was trying to make in that example is your obligations are not what are imposed or expected from society necessarily, right? What is your vasanas, what is your drive, what is your goal in life, that will determine your obligations. So Swami Ramatirtha is an extreme example. But yes, 90% people who want to mimic that. See, I also give the example, Swami Chinmayanand ji कहते थे, कोई आया उनके आश्रम ज्वाइन करने के लिए, तो उन्होंने कहा, have you enjoyed the world? Have you tasted wealth? Have you tasted pleasure? Have you been with a woman? He asked these questions. ये सब अनुभव करके आओ. So you almost think it is contradictory. यहाँ एक घर परिवार सब छोड़ करके यहाँ आ रहा है और यहाँ स्वामी जी बोल रहे हैं ये सब जाके अनुभव करो. It almost seems contradictory because this is not a one size fits all. It depends on who is being spoken to, who is the student, who is that person making that choice. What are your vasanas? स्वामी रामतीर्थ के वासना ही अलग थे, एक किसी और की वासना ही अलग है. अब for example, I myself, I've gone and studied 3.5, 4 years in an ashram. Thereafter, I've come into family life because of my vasanas, right? Because of my constitution, my desires, right? There's no right or wrong. Your desires, your goals, your constitution determines your obligation. अगर आप में वो वासनाएं हैं, अगर आप में वो डिजायर्स हैं, बट आप किसी डिल्यूजन से, मोह से, आपको स्पिरिचुअलिटी के बारे में भी मोह हो सकती है. थोड़ा बहुत स्पिरिचुअलिटी पढ़ लो और आप एकदम मोह में एकदम आप सोचने लगोगे कि हाँ मैं भी अगला विवेकानंद बन सकता हूँ. Used to say, we spent 3 months in the academy, everybody thinks they are a Vivekananda. That's a moh. And in that moh, in that delusion, see, what is the definition of tamasic renunciation? Tamasic renunciation is the giving up of obligations out of delusion. There can be spiritual delusion as well. There can be spiritual delusion as well. So, very few people are capable, qualified of being a Swami, as Omji said. Very few people are capable, qualified of being a Swami. Not everyone can suddenly decide, yes, I'm inspired by the Gita Ji, I'm going to give up everything and become a sannyasi. You can't choose to be a sannyasi. You have to earn that status. You have to grow to that status. And only you know what is your level. So, Swami Ramatirth ka level wo tha. You can't understand it, I can't understand it. So we can't conclude. But in hindsight, looking at what he did and how far he went and the knowledge he gave out, he was meant for this. Sattvic renunciation, absolutely. No question about it. Yes, Chetna ji. You had a question?
Sirji, I had a question, but I think I'm getting a hang of it. My question to you was, you said you cannot become sattvic. You can only drop your tamasic and rajasic nature to become sattvic, more sattvic. So my question was, how do we come to the state of egolessness? What do we have to drop? So I kind of got the answer that you have to take up karma bhakti gyan. So what would your take be on?
Karma bhakti jnana are the tools to eliminate tamas and rajas, right? And become sattvic.
Okay. So how do you come to the
mind, the gyan with your buddhi are the tools, are the practices, are the disciplines with which you will be able to eradicate tamas, elevate rajas to become sattvic. How do you eliminate ego? Well, what is ego? The depths of ego is tamas. So first of all, accepting, acknowledging that you don't know everything is a growth from tamas to rajas. A tamasic person doesn't want to listen, doesn't want the opinion of others, is not receptive to anything, totally arrogant, heedless. He doesn't heed others. So growth from tamas to rajas is beginning to heed, becoming receptive. wanting to learn, acknowledging that you don't know everything, and then a refinement of that further, acknowledging the vastness of your ignorance. You fall into another pit of the pit of rajas is you get to know a little bit and you think you know, and you get that pride of knowing. So understanding that ignorance is your ignorance uh, far exceeds your knowledge. That humility, it results in sattva. So lifting yourself from tamas, refining your rajas as far as your knowledge, your ego is concerned, you result as sattva. You result in humility. What is humility? Humility is sattva. Hmm?
Thank you.
Actually speaking, a lot of energy is required to leave tamas and rajas. उसी हिंदुस्तान में सिर्फ 2 आदमियों को महावीर कहा गया है, एक हनुमान जी को और एक जैन के जो महावीर थे उनको महावीर कहा गया, और किसी को भी नहीं कहा गया। उन्होंने, उनकी एनर्जी ही यही थी कि उन्होंने सब कुछ छोड़ दिया, सबको अपने आप को कंट्रोल किया, और वो ही एक शक्ति है जो अभी आप पूछ रहे हैं, वो वही है कि हमारे को उतनी एनर्जी चाहिए सब छोड़ने के लिए, हमारे पास उतनी एनर्जी नहीं है। तो
तप
धीरे
का तो यही मतलब हुआ ना जी, तप का और मतलब क्या हुआ? तप करना मतलब अपने
हाँ जी,
वचस को
यू हैव टू
से आगे बढ़ना।
मच ऑफ एनर्जी टू लीव, तमस को छोड़ने के लिए, रजस को छोड़ने के लिए।
कि हम we are only simplifying our understanding,
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean the process is simple.
yeah, process is not.
We are simplifying the understanding so that we don't have misconception about.
धीरे धीरे सब कुछ हो सकता है, धीरे धीरे रे मना धीरे सब कुछ होए, माली सींचे 100 घड़ा रुत आए फल होए। हो सकता है, ऐसा नहीं है कि भाई हताश नहीं हो जाना कि नहीं हो सकता, हो भी सकता है, लेकिन काफी कुछ हो सकता है।
काफी कुछ हो सकता है, बट हम एक साथ आए हैं इसे समझने के लिए ताकि हम एक दूसरे को आगे बढ़ा सकें।
ये सत्संग ही है, बहुत अच्छा सत्संग है, इससे अच्छा और क्या हो। ये तो हम बहुत अच्छे कर्म किए हैं जो हमारा ऐसा सत्संग हो रहा है।
करेक्ट। तो सत्संग से हम एक दूसरे की सहायता से हम आगे बढ़ सकते हैं। दैट्स द थॉट। इट्स नॉट इजी बट इट्स नॉट इम्पॉसिबल। With that thought, we'll conclude today and we'll see you again on Monday where we'll begin section 2. So this concludes section 1. Prepare your chart. This
Thank you.
this book.
Ram.
Thank you, Sir.